You're listening to Bridge the Gap Season 4, a podcast dedicated to inform, educate, and influence the future of housing and services for seniors. This podcast is powered by supporting partners Propel Insurance, Enquire, LTC REIT, the Bridge Group Construction, and Solinity. Learn more at btgvoice.com.
Welcome to Bridge the Gap podcast, the senior living podcast with Josh and Lucas. A incredible, exciting episode today. We're going to be talking about challenges in senior living design with an expert interior designer, Keri Moore of 828 Design. Welcome to the show.
Hi, thank you for having me.
We're so excited to talk to you today because not only are your designs amazing and hyper-focused in senior care, you're also just a really outgoing and fun person to talk to, an incredible backstory. You know, Keri, a lot of people make their way into senior living after a career in other verticals. And I find that when we talk to designers, that is a story that I hear so often is that, you know, I was designing in hotels or I was designing in something else. But you've been in this industry 15 years. And even though maybe you didn't set out to start in senior living, you actually got your start in senior living and you've stayed. Yeah. Tell us about that story.
Yeah, it's pretty incredible. You know, one of my first internships, that's where I cut my teeth on senior living. And, you know, as a designer, you really want to get the jobs that you can travel with and do amazing designs. And I remember, you know, year one, I was fresh out of college and I was at an install and I was so excited to be there. Really didn't know my purpose, right? I was just there to do whatever I needed to do. And I knew, you know, we did senior living and it was a cool field, right? But, you know, as I was, you know, navigating through the installation, a resident had just moved in and he was sitting on a sofa. And he looked at me and he had tears in his eyes and he just sat there and he grabbed my hand and he said, "Honey, I could just sit here all day." And at that moment, I was hooked. At that moment, I knew how impactful, even picking a sofa or making sure he's comfortable staring out the window, right? And creating an environment where you can age and truly enjoy, you know, the rest of your life is pretty impactful, incredible what we can do. So I've just had a fire in me ever since that day. And I'm very fortunate to be able to start there and just really grow and evolve as a designer. So.
Josh, I'm not crying. You're crying, buddy. Come on.
We're both crying. Stop it.
You know, I'm a big proponent. Josh, you're an owner, operator, developer. You know, I'm in the construction side of the business as well. I'm a big proponent of saying, like, look, we need to be utilizing people that have a focus in this space because this is not, it's one thing to make a beautiful space, right? But then there's another thing for senior living to actually create an environment that impacts the well-being of older adults. That's a different thing. When you get into wellness and universal design and just creating an environment where that resident sits in that chair and says, "I can sit here all day," his life was improved in that moment. And you know, there's beautiful chairs and there's beautiful sofas, but that does not necessarily mean that it's going to work in senior living. So Keri, there's all of these challenges in designing around senior living. We're going to discuss some of those today. Let's first start off with kind of post-pandemic. One of the biggest challenges today, and this is something that I hear frequently, is FF&E. Talk to our listeners. Number one, what is FF&E and why has this become a challenge right now?
Yeah, for sure. Well, first of all, FF&E means fixtures, furniture, and equipment. So it's pretty much all the beautiful furnishings, right, inside a building. If you pick up the building and shake it out, everything that falls out is FF&E, right? So
that's a good way to put it.
Yeah, shake out the building, that's FF&E, right? Window treatments, accessories, all the little things that create an environment, right, that we have in our home. So that's what FF&E is. There's been a ton of changes post-COVID. It's, you know, furniture is definitely impacted, but there's a couple things that go hand in hand with furniture. You know, it's not just furniture, it's the fabric and how that fabric affects the furniture and how it's fabricated just in general, and it also circle backs to the lead time and freight. So, on that end of it, we all know that there's been some major delays and major shift focuses on, just construction in general and the environments and communities that we build every day. But once you get to the, through construction, that's when we come in with the furniture, and it's completely changed. We used to not start selecting furniture until like 6 months out, and then we'd maybe purchase 3 months before. Well, I purchased furniture back in November and it still hasn't shipped. So there's been some major delays in some furnishings lately with just lead times. So
that is post-COVID. We're in the post-COVID era. I mean, we're still living with it, obviously, like we may be, indefinitely, even with the vaccine. But is that something that you see going back to prior to COVID, or has this industry with timelines and all of that, as we shake all this out, what is things that you don't see going back? And like, as someone that might be entering in a new project post-COVID, the development, like what does that process and timing budget need to look like?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I do start seeing improvements, right? I mean, that's pretty drastic of when we were kind of in the thick of COVID, right? At the end of last year when we had that big wave again, right? When lockdown started happening. Unfortunately, some of our projects that were in procurement right then had probably the largest impact from even early on, 2020. I can tell you, we constantly are talking with our furniture vendors and manufacturers about what they're doing. Long ago, people used to have a ton of stock. They keep frames in hand. The fabric manufacturers would keep goods and excess in their warehouses. Probably the last 10 years, we've seen a switch where goods are more readily available. They don't have to have overhead in stock. So the goods just, were, easy to get. Now, because of the lead times and with, factories shutting down and different things like that, it hit tremendously. But a lot of the furniture manufacturers I've been talking to recently are starting to restock up. I mean, I'm sure, not a lot of people may have heard of the foam shortage, but when Snowvid, as I call it, hit in Texas, there was 2 chemicals that produced foam that really put a kink in factories up in North Carolina, West and East Coast manufacturing plants that, slowed things down. But now that things are starting to kind of balance out a little bit to the new normalcy, manufacturers are stocking up more because they're worried that if shutdown does happen or goods start slowing in transit, then they can still maintain. I think with the data that they've been receiving, lately on their goods and trade, coming in and out, they're able to ramp up and kind of stockpile back now that we used to not see before. So I think that's a plus. I really think that's a plus. But it's a balancing act right now, even if, warehouses are stocking up their goods, a lot of the labor force in the factories, even though people are getting vaccinated, they had significant shutdowns of factories. They're still, some people are older workers that are not returning, even though they're vaccinated, they're just not returning to the factories. And so just like any recession, those skilled laborers go away, right? We're seeing that more now in the larger factories. Those skilled laborers are just not coming back, which slow production. So lots of factors.
Keri, did you experience a real shift, or are you experiencing where a lot of the manufacturers that you were regularly using before, you've had to shift and change manufacturers a lot? How has that impacted design?
Yeah. Yes and no. A couple of years ago, we started seeing longer lead times, and then like tariffs came around before COVID, right? We saw a significant increase in cost. And so a couple of years ago, we internally did a shift where we started using more factories that are here in America, not outsourcing as much, just to help control regular lead times and just cost period. But the thing about it is most of the frames, there's just a couple of manufacturers that true turnkey American made goods. That's just the reality. But, goods and frames are still coming, on a slow boat that, like I said, they're starting to see, what are popular styles. We're starting to see more focus on, what the manufacturers are stocking up, where we're having, lead times. Lately, I've been selecting based off of quick ship programs, and I think there's going to be a lot more quick ship programs that manufacturers are going to roll out just because they can control the goods that they keep in the warehouse. Now, I don't think necessarily it means that they're going to be quick ship. It's kind of like FedEx today. You pay for overnight and you're lucky to get it in 2 days. I think that's what the new quick ship is going to be. It's just factories and manufacturers focusing on the popular goods, right? And kind of following that wave and guaranteeing that you can get your goods on time. But a lot of the lead times are bouncing back. A lot of, the 8 to 10 weeks we're 16 to 20 weeks out. They're comfortable with doing 8 to 12 weeks now, which is good. So it changes our selections. Absolutely.
Mm-hmm. The whole plan around the design, and this goes for new construction ground up and also renovation, where you're reimagining spaces and making a plan. You got to really think through these things, especially on a renovation, right? Because the duration is going to be a lot shorter than a ground up.
Pump the brakes. Let the furniture get on order before you start ripping up carpet. Y'all move so quickly, Yeah. So, and it's just about communicating with your owner. We've been very transparent, with our owner operators and letting them know. A lot of, people understand, they get it, a lot of it's out of our control. But, Josh, to your question, we are constantly in contact with our vendors, not trying to find new vendors coming out of the woodworks, for quality control. But, it's been really interesting, the shift of quality control. We've been FaceTiming factories, getting videos sent to us. So it's been a challenge, but we're getting through it.
I had another just follow-up question. I'm going to draw the conclusion. Something near and dear to my heart is controlling the project, the overall community cost of development. Mm-hmm. Obviously, construction prices have gone through the roof. Yeah. I'm going to assume with the limited supply chain and the interruptions and the freights and all that, I mean, how impactful has that been to this very important line item of FF&E to these development budgets?
Yeah, I've increased mine, 2 to 4% on top of what I normally schedule as a placeholder, because freight's gone up significantly. We're working on some custom lighting, and there was and again, it's coming over overseas, but I mean, we've seen cost increase on freight just from formal quotes we've got in January that we're trying to procure right now. So, I think, that goes back to people not returning to work, during COVID and the shutdowns. If you weren't an essential good transporter, a lot of layoffs happened and a lot of trucks and equipment were sitting idle. And so getting that workforce back on the market, is really what's impacting our freight, globally, definitely in our country here. But so again, longer hours, short staff, truckers and people on the road that cannot be carriers, demanding more pay, overtime. Everything is just it's just a snowball effect.
So let's shift the topic to something that a lot of operators are focused in on right now, which is occupancy, right? Coming out of this whole cycle that we've been in, they're trying to figure out, CapEx has been put on hold. They've had to, move resources over to PPE, right? And a bunch of other things that are unplanned expenses, big expenses.
Yeah.
So what can operators do right now to refocus their attention back to general CapEx stuff? How do they plan for this? What can they do? Is there more inexpensive things that they could do to try to spruce up either the exterior or the lobby or maybe some resident rooms just to get some occupancy boost on what they're trying to accomplish right now?
Yeah. I think what goes back to all those added costs, right, with PPE and different things. There was a huge, as everywhere, a huge shift in cleaning, and maintenance. I mean, the cleaning protocols in general. We've seen on existing communities where, they probably didn't clean the lounge chairs before. They probably didn't clean the sofas before and do total wipe downs, so I'm sure there's been some immediate, we've seen it in some of our clients, immediate replacement needs because somebody put bleach on the sofa or that main dining table at the front entry kind of thing, which all goes back to, how manufacturers are producing furniture. Are we using more vinyls or not now? There's a whole shift for that. But, I think, it's hard for existing communities that don't have a designer engaged because they have no idea what things cost, and so, with occupancies, just doing that whole marketing tour, that's your main first impression and, what looks tired, what needs updated. If for a rule of thumb, if I were a community and didn't have a designer on board, do some retail shopping and, at least double it, right? Not quite triple, because we can get some really good things for you at cost. So, if you kind of use that as a rule of thumb, just for furniture updates, I'd give you a good placeholder, right? If you can't really hire a consultant to help you, at least build those funds in. And, if you can engage in a consultant, they can help give you a roadmap of what you can use, give you preliminary ideas, at least some budget plugs. We see that a lot. The last year has been huge in CapEx updates and renovations. So, just with the sheer construction costs, people need to update what they have today, which is exciting. So,
Lucas, we've talked a lot about this on the show through the years, but it seems to me having the interior design team on the front end of whether it's a renovation project or a new construction is more important than ever. I know in my day job, the consulting side of our business, I go into a lot of what I would call rescue missions of new construction or renovation projects. And, what we oftentimes find is these unrealistic expectations because the proper team hasn't been aligned and they've placed some numbers in there that maybe came off of a pro forma from 5 or 6 years ago that might have been relevant then. But if you are pricing things, it sounds like to me, even from a year and a half ago, and you're expecting to receive that same type of product delivery, Keri, it sounds like, we're going to way miss the mark, right?
Absolutely. We see that all the time. That's the first thing we ask is what's your budget when someone engages us and you're like, oh man, that's way too low, and how, they're not experts. They're managing a community that is not their field that they need to be in. So of course they're way off on numbers, so what we do from a design perspective, we're like, okay, what can we do today to get the best bang for your buck? And we're going to have to phase it. Right. And then we just set them up for the future. Maybe it's a 5-year plan or a 2-year plan, depending on how their cash flow works. But, that's generally, you're exactly right. They don't plan enough just for the sheer knowledge. They're not educated in that field, which is okay. So, as design teams get together, that's the best thing that we can do is advise them what we can do with it today and get them on track. And guess what? That gives them better budgeting for the future. They can start factoring in escalation costs, even if their position they leave and, they've got good numbers in the future to set up for. So, but yeah, we generally turn into a phasing plan just because the budgets are so low.
Totally. That's one of the first, that is the first question that I ask oftentimes in discussing with people is, have you engaged an interior designer? And I'll be candid. There was a project at the end of last year, actually the beginning of this year, that was a question that I asked and they really couldn't get a good answer. And I could tell that they were not really going to go that route. And I backed out. I just did not want to be involved in a bad deal. I just knew if you're not organized and you don't see, foresight enough
Yeah.
to know that you've got to assemble a good team if you want to accomplish the goals. So they missed out on, potentially, building a good team. So that's very, very important. As we round out the show, Keri, let's talk about, what are some popular spaces that people are reimagining right now? A lot of the communities that are existing and current inventory, the floor plans may be a little antiquated, and so they're reimagining those spaces. So why don't you quickly hit that, and then on the other side for ground up, quickly hit maybe one big design trend that you're seeing in the new design of brand new buildings.
Well, a lot of existing buildings, say they're 10 to 20 years old, a lot of what we're starting to implement is bringing in more satellite markets, right? Just because of, I think it was a trend before COVID was coming in. We started seeing it, but I see the need even more, where if you do want to order something to go, or you want to go get a little snack and kind of socially interact at your comfort level, I think is key. Having that, it goes back to what we've been, preaching for the last decade of having choice and getting away from the old, sea of tables in the dining room. But I think the market's more important every day now, just because you can get something prepackaged. You're not having to, back to the dishes. I mean, you can even see it in the restaurants today. You're eating on disposable silverware and prepackaged things, so you're not touching everything. So I think that whole market to go bistro concept is something very valuable. And put it at the front door. You want to walk in and see some choice and excitement and have opportunity to engage and sit and have coffee, or, make it self-serve, right? I'm not, it's, I don't know if anyone's experienced an Amazon Go store, but I imagine one day we'll have that in our communities where, you just walk through and you come out and it's put on your tab kind of thing. So I do think that's something that will be beneficial for repositioning for sure.
I love that. So what about ground up? What trends are you seeing there?
In ground up, pretty similar. I think a lot of the trends now, a lot of the focus the last year has been a little bit more healthcare related on how, a lot of deaths happened in our environment, in our market, right? And a lot of it wasn't even COVID related. It was because they were so isolated. And so I think, our design has been driven on how we can create environments where if something like this ever occurs again, how we can still keep the lobby open, or lounge space, or celebration room, right? If you want to have dinner with your family, maybe outdoor connection, right? Instead of just sitting at the window, maybe there's an outdoor entry where you're not having to walk through the whole living room or lobby and, contaminate the space kind of thing. So, we're really reimagining lounge and living spaces on how, we can just keep environments where people can use them and be safe and feel safe again. Everybody's still eating, dining rooms are filling up. A lot of our population is fully vaccinated, which is exciting. I've been in communities lately and it's great to see residents again. Some are still social distancing or even still doing takeout. And then some dining rooms are 100% occupied. So again, choice. And then flexibility for any other outbreak in the future, I think is just, architects and design teams are just looking to see how we can do that. And it even goes back to furniture, I think reimagining design in furniture where, not that you have to always be 6 foot apart, right? That's not, it's maybe a normal for a while. I don't know how normal it's going to be in the future, but, having the opportunity to do something a little bit more modular that doesn't look like a hospital waiting room, but it's maybe a boutique sectional. And then if something happens, maybe you replace a component at a table so you're separated. So, I don't know if there's, a magic thing about what the greatest design is right now, but I think, this last year has made designers and architects across the country reimagine how we treat circulation and movement through our spaces, which I think is the most important today.
I love the creative exercise of creative experts reimagining senior housing. That gets me excited. This has been a fun conversation, Lucas and Keri. And for those of our listeners, they need to go actually also, Lucas, and watch this episode on YouTube. Before we hit record, we got to see and hear more about the dog tribute, your animals behind you, and the cool artwork that you did. So our YouTubers will want to go check that out for sure.
Yes, you have an amazing space there. Keri Moore of 828 Design out of Austin, Texas. For our listeners that want to learn more about Keri and all of our shows, you can go to btgvoice.com and you can access all of our content there. Connect with us on social. Let's continue this conversation as we have this very meaningful topical discussion around design challenges and opportunities. Keri, thanks for spending time with us today.
Yeah, thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure.
Great to see you, Josh. Thanks for a great conversation. And to all of our listeners, thanks for listening to another great episode of Bridge the Gap.
Thanks for listening to Bridge the Gap podcast with hosts Josh Crisp and Lucas McCurdy. If you were informed, educated, or influenced by this episode, we want to know. Leave a comment on social media or contact us in the show notes. Powered by supporting partners, Propel Insurance, Enquire, LTC REIT, The Bridge Group Construction, and Solinity. Learn more at btgvoice.com.